Potomac crew, and of course, Mr. Jeff Livingston, wherever he may be. So I have to tell you, Jeff said to me when he first invited me to speak to y'all, he said, this will be fun, it'll be easy, and it's a blogging crowd, and you'll love it. Well, first of all, he was right about that. You guys are so friendly. Thank you for your hospitality. And then he said, oh, and by the way, don't worry about anything, because you just have to talk for 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And I thought, oh, wonderful, that'll be good. Then he said to me, you don't need to do a PowerPoint. In fact, don't do a PowerPoint. And I thought, oh my God, now I really am in big trouble, because you see, PowerPoints are my crutch. So what I did was I made this mind map. So this is my speech. Here and now I'm going. No. So I put it on my Facebook page. And one of my friends said to me, I didn't know you were a mad scientist. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe I am, because in social we are really all sort of mad scientists. So I am not nearly as cool as Lauren. This is my dog, by the way. So I have some notes and I have a prop, because that's what you have to do when you're coming from a media world. So let me begin by saying those that tell the story shape our lives. And I want to tell you a little story. When I was a little girl, my dad used to tell my sister, Susan, and me stories. And one of the stories he used to tell us was about an elephant. And the elephant had two friends, and I'm pretty sure you can imagine who those two friends were. Two little girls by the names of Toby and Susan. And he told us these stories, and to be really candid with you, I don't even remember what the stories were about at this point. But I can tell you that my sister became totally obsessed about collecting elephants. Small elephants, big elephants, China elephants, wood elephants, and a ton of stuffed elephants. She loved these elephants so much because they created a bond between her and my dad, and her and I as well, listening to these stories together, that she even took them to her wedding. Now, that was a little strange, but my family is a little bit interesting, a little bit weird, but I tend to think that we all have interesting people in our lives. So what I want you to keep in mind and hold this thought is, sometimes the stories that are told, it's the storyteller who really influences us. The stories will help us, but the storyteller influences us. The power of stories, let me make sure I get this right. Those who tell stories hold the power. Those who tell stories rule society. Those who tell stories rule the world. Those three quotes have been attributed both to Plato and the Hopi American Indians. I find that interesting. Two societies that were years and years apart and cultures apart got something right. Those that tell the stories hold the influence. So today in our world, we may be telling stories differently. With the digital world, we have the opportunity to blog, to use social networks, God bless you, to include videos in what we're doing. But at the end of the day, it's the story that moves us along. Once upon a time, in our not too far distant past, the people who told those stories were trained, objective, we'd like to think, observers. Call them watchers, call them journalists. And the journalists not only told the stories, but they had the opportunity to make the decisions to control where, how, and when those stories were told. Jeff Jarvis calls this, I think the audio just went on. Jeff Jarvis calls this, they claimed possession of the stories. And back in the day, before social media, before the digital world took over, it was pretty much okay with us because we couldn't find stories any other way. That's how we got our information. And if we didn't like what one journalist had to say, well, there were a multitude of newspapers. And people would read different newspapers. My dad read 4 or 5 newspapers every single day. And then if you went to television news and you didn't like that, even though there weren't a lot of choices, you could change the channel. So you could get different points of view. And by the way, back in the day, before the clicker, that channel, a couple of people remember that?
Get up and change.
Exactly. And because we had to get up and change the channel, there were no couch potatoes back then, were there? So we were getting our exercise. So maybe that's what we ought to do. We ought to tell the First Lady to tell the kids to throw away the clickers and run back and forth to change the channel. So the digital world made a difference because it began to change, as you well know, the way that information was presented and who presented that information. But back in the day, when only those journalists, those specialized, unique people told us stories, something interesting happened. We let them into our world, we let them into our lives, and they became trusted family friends. We thought we knew them. We didn't really. We didn't know if they were married, had children, where they lived. But we thought we knew them because we saw them every day, or we read them every day. They maybe thought they knew us through information that they could get from Nielsen or Arbitron or whatever other research their station might have had and might or might not have given them. Because remember, these were the reporters, they weren't management. So that information more than likely wasn't shared a lot. So that relationship was very strange. They came into our homes, we thought we knew them, they thought we knew us, they knew us, but perhaps not so much. So when the digital world came in and people started to build websites, of course the media was right out there and we built our websites and it was static information and that's okay because that's the way it was back in the day. Well, social media came in and one would have thought that the media companies would have had a giant first step leap into this world because, remember, we had now relationships, or we thought we had relationships with those journalists because we let them into our homes, we trusted them. Not so much. The media, when they put their social media sites together, took 2 different paths. The first path that they took was they held the brand really close and tight. So unlike some of the companies that we've seen who are using social media to, the buzzword is, humanize the organization, the media initially did not. So for instance, as an example, Richard Attell and Lionel, they were the people that humanized and changed perception of that company. Scott Monte is changing the perception of Ford. There's a guy that you all probably know called Tony Sheen, who tapped into the most important resource in a company, and that was his staff. To have his staff go out into the social media world and talk to people. That company was Zappos. And Zappos built a huge world-class brand based upon that conversation. And then there's a guy by the name of Frank Eliason. And Frank Eliason used to work for Comcast. And Frank Eliason made us think that perhaps, just perhaps, this cable company might care about us, the customer. They were talking to us. They were transparent. The media companies, not so much. So what we've learned is that we've missed the learnings. The companies like the Dells and the Zappos and even Comcasts are way ahead of the media company when it comes to putting together social media, transparency, and conversations. When we think about it, it's really something that came out of a cultural fit. So going back to where those reporters came from, what their job was to take the information and to conduct one-way conversations. And the culture of that permeated throughout the organizations of media companies. So that's how the media companies walked into social media, with that orientation. What we're now seeing is that what everybody else has learned is that the more that we converse with people in that world, the more likely we are to get loyal customers who might turn into viewers, who might pass along our information, but it's a step-by-step process. It's still a slow build. It's a very slow build for us. Some of the journalists, however, have really gotten it, and they understand that in order to build community, you have to step out. You have to take a risk. So let me give you an example. There's this amazing man who is one of our anchors in the Bay Area. His name is Frank Somerville. Frank Somerville is not a Gen Y, he's not a Gen X, he's a boomer, and he's a dad with a family. And Frank's Facebook page, depending upon the day and the light and the moon and the stars, ranks in top markets between 2 and 3 of most followed people, most friended anchors across the country. And the reason is because Frank has stepped out, and he gives us part of who he is. So one day he'll talk about his children. The next day he'll talk about a news story that he's working on. The next day he'll give us a behind look at what's happening. And what that's done from Frank, not only has it increased the viewership of the programs that he's worked on, but something else has happened. His followers will drop comments and give him hints of stories that they want covered. So it's a way for him to create credible sources of the community that he is involved with. And it's a way to look at stories a little bit differently. So in the media world, our product is our content, when you think about it. So it's not so far away from, if anybody here who's in B2B or services in B2B, your product is probably your content as well, especially on a consulting basis, big consulting companies. How much content do you give away? Because in the social world, remember, people's orientation is that everything has to be free. And so we struggle with that. We struggle with the line. And we struggle with the stories. So nowadays, what might have been a private source who just came to you as a reporter has realized that he doesn't have to come to you. She doesn't have to come to you. She can be her own media source. She can drop that scoop in Twitter, and you've lost it. So we're taking a look now at what really constitutes what we can bring to the social media party and what type of stories and information we can give our readers, our listeners, that might get them to follow us, and more importantly, might get them to share that information. Because as you all well know, what I like to say is the BP and J of social these days is the share. And without that share, it's just, going back to my media experience, another communication channel. And that's not what social's all about. You're losing 3/4 of the power of this if you just think about it as a content distribution channel. So we're taking another look at stories. And what we're finding is that the stories behind the stories are what really is making an impact. The feature stories, the stories that people really care about, sports, of course, weather, obviously. I was sitting in a morning pitch meeting. For those of you who haven't been involved with TV or our newspapers, what happens in the media is that in the morning, the reporters all gather around with some of the executive producers and the news director, and they pitch stories, basically to the news director. And one reporter will say, well, this is what I want to do, and another reporter will say, this is what I want to do, and they agree on that, and then they go off and they do it. So I was in this meeting, and one reporter said, well, I want to do this. News director said, not so much. She kept on going, she kept on going, she kept on going. He said, okay, that's it. Now I care. And I thought, wow, That's really powerful. Now I care. Go off and do that story. So what is in back of the stories is, what is the now I care? Doesn't matter if it's a B2B, if it's a B2C, if it's an NPO. Those now I care stories are the stories that are going to resonate with our customers, with your customers. And they may not be exactly what you may think. So let me give you an example from working with an NPO. You know, NPOs love social media once they understand it, because they can tell their stories. And everybody likes the NPO stories because their heart throbs. And the NPO wants to tell their stories all the time. But sometimes you get tired of listening to one company's stories over and over again, no matter how wonderful they are. Well, one Martin Luther King Day, the social media manager saw this graphic. And the graphic was of crayons, different shades of skin tones. And the message was, we're really all alike. And she posted that. That one little graphic that had nothing to do with anything that the nonprofit organization was doing got more engagement than anything she had put up in months. What was really interesting about that was not necessarily the fact that it was against what she did or not in line with what they wanted to do, but it lined the values of the NPO to the post. So when we're looking at the stories and the content to bring out, it's not necessarily specific to the brand. It's not necessarily the value add, and I think the value add of content when you bring it out into the social world is a cost of doing business. You just have to put that kind of information out there. But it's the stories that make you say, now I care, and align with the values of your brand that really push the brand forward, and people want to share. They want to tell their friends because it's something that resonates with them. So hold that thought while I find my place. The new direction for journalists, and I think for most people who are now working in the social media world, is you just can't be a Johnny One Note in terms of your talents and skills. And by that I mean, if you write a blog, you need to put photographs next to it. You need to put graphics next to it. Videos are a non-brainer. The videos are coming up hot and heavy, and people are more likely to watch a video than a lot of other things. What we're finding is if you combine them, then that's really where you can get some power. So combine text with video. And as we know with Facebook, Facebook is now putting more emphasis on their algorithms on photos and graphics, and we don't know where they're going tomorrow with the videos, but we're seeing anecdotally in metrics that videos do pop engagement, at least for us they do.
On Facebook, as soon as you scroll to a video, it begins to play without audio on its own. They're pushing that.
Yeah, very cool they are.
Actually, Google's algorithm now is having an update from Google.
Oh, really?
Middle of last year, it was called Google Hummingbird. Instead of doing the middle updates, it went to a whole concept of semantic search. So it's the interactions that matter a lot more than links. If you're not mobile, if you're not social, if you're not getting those signals, you don't rank like a traditional website used to.
Right. So engagement becomes even more critical.
It's a ranking factor.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So the lessons that I learned from that is that you put content into play that resonates with your audience, but that goes beyond. So in the social media world of the journalist, we're asking journalists to do so many more things. We're asking them to report. We're asking them from the field to tweet. We're asking them to do Facebook. We're asking them to do Instagram. We're asking, and budgets are being cut, so we're asking them to be their own photographers. We're asking them to be their own videographers. The same thing, I think, applies in the business world. We're asking our people to do so much more, and in social, those components really do matter. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention, and this really does apply in a business world, is we have conversations. It's an industry challenge of who owns the social media network from a particular reporter. Is it the reporter, the journalist, the talent, the jock, or is it the organization? So what happens if, well, when somebody builds out their social media Twitter page and the company puts resources against it, when they leave, what do you do with that page? When Richard at Dell left Dell, that page went down. When Lionel left Dell, I think it's still up. When Frank Eliason left Comcast, what he did is he transferred the page to somebody else. I was talking to one of our young reporters in Pittsburgh who was building his Facebook page very organically, very much the old way, through conversation, through getting out in the community and telling people to friend him on Facebook, and through making those connections. And I said, Dave, what happens if Cox comes back tomorrow and says, we've been putting resources against your page, and you go off to another company and they say, we want to kill the page? And he said to me, Toby, it wouldn't matter, because I'm building community, and those people will follow me. Very, very powerful. And so now what you have is you have people that are tweeting, blogging, Facebooking to build their own personal brand, but at the same time, they are doing this to build the company brand, so that has to be aligned. So where do we go from there? And how do you address it within your companies? It's a huge concern, and as more and more people bring their social networks to the party, and as more and more companies realize that that social community, and as Lauren pointed out, building community is just so important. If you can build community, you've got a real competitive advantage going into your next job. What happens then? The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was this new landscape. So the new landscape is sort of competitive landscape. It's interesting to me because we are now, as one news director said, we're competing against ourselves. So think about this. In the digital world, we have brand blogs, brand websites, and now the journalists, your employees, have Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts. Where do the customers go? Do they go to the brand? Do they go to the journalist? We are now competing not only with our own internal people, but with the people that, as I mentioned before, used to be our sources. They can do this. They don't need us anymore. Yeah, we can give them maybe bigger exposure, but maybe not, because they can build their own following. And then there's our moms. So our moms are out there, and they have huge influence within their own sphere. I'm talking about our audiences. So where do our audiences go? So 3 different ways to look at it. When we take a look at social media, we take a look at a couple of things. When we're looking at it from an overview, we take a look at, are we building community? Are we connecting with people? Are we giving them stories that make them care? And I say that you have to have all 3 of them. And the all 3 of them gives you something special that you can't get in any other kind of, call it customer communication. And that is heart. Here's the heart, the little hug. And that's wallet. So social media combines share of wallet with share of heart. And to make it really, if you please pass that around, this chocolate for everybody. And if you can combine those, you have a real good chance of winning in this world.